Welcome to the Sage Verse, with real works and true words. Patterns of recognition leave your brain converged. Time is irrelevant when the thoughts of impediment corrupt your soul with mind-numbing nemesis. The sage's way is where the truth hits the page. Turn your soul into a library in the name of knowledge and discovery. We seek out reality to be gone of human apathy. Welcome back to the Sage Verse, where we explore the pressing questions of our age. My name's Jason, and today I'm joined by a good friend of mine and fellow founder of the channel, Hermes. How you doing today, man?
Very well today, thank you. I'm Hermes, and this is the Sage's Way podcast. Today, Jason's coming up with the concept, so do you want to let us know what we're going to be discussing?
Sure. So the idea that I want to introduce is one that I came across not too long ago, probably around, well, actually, now that I say that, it was about a year ago. Maybe even a little bit longer, but it's basically the comparison between the just man and the unjust, and essentially who is better off. Now this is a question that Socrates and Plato discussed in Plato's Republic, and also Plato's Meno as well, I think. And it's really interesting because I think in society, we often see the unjust man being better off, perhaps more financially successful, and having more physical assets, whereas the just man perhaps not being so. Now, not to say, right, that all unjust men are successful and financially wealthy. Not to say that all just men are the opposite.
Broke.
Yeah, broke. But I think that in the context of this discussion, there is some correlation on both sides as well. There are Machiavellian tendencies that enable people to rise up the ranks, and psychopaths supposedly operate at the higher levels of society at times in CEO positions. So it's not a far-fetched idea to posit. So again, the question is, who is better off, the unjust man or the just? And
Okay.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on that and what you think about it.
Okay, yeah, I mean, Plato's Republic, I'm familiar with it. The whole book's pretty much about justice. So I remember, I think it was in book 2, he spoke about the Ring of Gyges. You familiar with that?
Let me think. It's been a while since I've read it. But
So I can give a basically they actually asked that same question: who's better off? Or they compare the just man with the unjust man. So they create two scenarios. So the just man, the person they create, is someone that is poor and not doing too well kind of in their everyday life, but they're always following their moral compass essentially. So
I'm remembering
they
now.
refuse to go against that.
The name skipped my mind for a second. Sorry, continue.
But because of how some people are treated when they're not too well off, people actually also see him as unjust, because they see him as someone that to be in that position, they must not be a good person. And then they compare it with an unjust man who's hyper successful, cheats to get what he wants, and he's so good at being unjust that everyone sees him as just or wants to be like him. So yeah, they do create that comparison. I remember there's a parable in book 2, the Ring of Gyges, which essentially was about a shepherd who goes into a cave, just herding his sheep. He discovers a cave, and on a skeleton, I think it was, he discovered a ring, and he thought it was just some normal ring, didn't know if it held much value, but he put on the ring and kind of continued on his shepherding, and he ended up turning the ring, and I think it gave him like some kind of special powers, like it made him invisible, and he ended up using that power to gain status within society. He ended up killing the king, seducing the queen, becoming a very high level member of society. And then they posed the question, who would not use this power had they had the opportunity to have this ring? And even Socrates admitted, like, the majority of people would use this power, but Socrates argued that you would always know yourself, even if you're that good at being unjust, you would always know yourself to be an unjust person, which would lead you away from happiness. I think that's kind of the direction they're going in. Do you want to add a bit to that and your thoughts?
There's so much to unpack in what you said. So much to unpack. I think 3 or 4 things just popped up in my mind. I'll start with the first one. We don't have to answer this question. We can revisit it later. But the idea of justice being a social concept or a natural concept. Because if it is by definition natural, then injustice is to some degree a fatal flaw that we have adopted in our humanity. That is, if justice is by definition a natural concept and not a construct defined by society. That's also another argument.
It's a good point. What is justice? Is it just the law, or is it... Because sometimes there's loopholes. Sometimes people break the rules, but they're still within their loophole. So, and everyone can see that it's unjust, but it's not necessarily going against the law. So, what are we defining as justice here?
Well, some would say in order to have this discussion in the first place, we'd have to start with those first questions that I don't even think Socrates and Plato were able to come to a conclusion on. Never mind two chaps like us, but that's what we're here. That's what we're doing. We're searching for the truth. But just to go on to the other ideas that were popping up. So you mentioned then that who would turn away this power, right? Who would turn away the power to be able to succeed beyond one's prior state, right? So if I'm given a tool that allows me to access profit or benefit in whichever means, there is an injustice there that perhaps is hidden. And there is a quote that Jung said, and it was recently regurgitated by Jordan Peterson. I recently came across it in a TikTok. You know, when you're mindlessly scrolling. It was I don't know it verbatim, but it was, be afraid, or along those lines, of undeserved wisdom, right? So there is to some degree an injustice where wisdom is not earned. There is an injustice where success is not earned. There is an injustice where financial wealth is not earned, right? So the idea...
I've heard it before.
The idea that you're able to manipulate your way up to the top by cutting corners, deceiving and cheating, lying and stealing, to a certain degree, that is not earned in a noble sense. But who's to say that that is still not earned? It's perhaps difficult to do those things, right? But then that brings into the question of morality and our inner sense, and maybe that underlying conscience that we have, right? Our conscience, we live with it every day. And I think to be able to undermine that puts into question whether or not that actually exists. And by conscience, what do I mean? Are these people not sentient? Of course they are. I think the word conscience perhaps is not the right word. Perhaps the word is soul, you know? Perhaps that underlying goodness that embodies all humanity, which directs us into performing just action and behaving in a righteous manner. So the question then, just to tie this off before I'll pass it on to you, the idea then of the unjust man performing all these actions that are crimes in some legal sense and human sense, moral sense. Well, it returns us to that question of nature. Well, has nature allowed this to happen? And if there is no guiding principle within nature of morality, then who's to say that it's just a race to the top? And this is one of the many tools of how to do it. And maybe justice is just that social concept and is not something that's ingrained within nature. So
so bouncing off that. So with that idea of what justice is, and because you can always look to the law, like that's the kind of, every country has its own laws, but I guess within the country we're living in, there's been kind of a process throughout centuries and millennia where they've constructed a certain level of, these are the right things to do, these are the wrong things to do. You can also look within certain religions and things like that, like Ten Commandments in Christianity, for example.
Just a point quickly there. We are living off the back end of an entire social history of Judeo-Christianity, right? It was embedded into our legal system and served as the underlying framework for most of our laws. So
it's always been a practice, though. I'm sure there's been things,
is knowledge,
they
is
used
justice
to practice,
a virtue?
Yeah, they used to practice a lot stricter laws like death penalties, things like that. So there's been a practice of law and order throughout the years, and I guess we're at the stage we're at now. Do I think current laws cover the whole scope of justice? I don't think so. With our current society, we live in a capitalistic society in which you're rewarded, or I guess the levels of who you are as a person is almost based on how successful or how hyper successful you are, how much money is in your bank account. Also, as countries, they look at which country is making the most money, which one is getting the most economic growth. That's how we're rated to an extent. So if you're doing whatever you can within, I guess, the laws, then surely, even if some people see you as unjust, or you're doing things in a cheating kind of manner, you're using loopholes, but you're succeeding, then to an extent, within morality, you're unjust. But in how our current system works, you can be seen as, just a hyper successful man, which loads of people tend to envy these days. So I don't think law covers the whole scope of justice. I think, to an extent, inside we do have a level of natural law that we can tap into. We can see when something's right and wrong. We can feel when something's right and wrong. And when you develop your own moral compass, also based on your own kind of trial and error, then I think that's what it's all about. It's forming your own moral compass and doing what you believe to be right. And that's what I think the just man is. Someone that would follow their own moral compass if they see an opportunity to get ahead within how society is rating what good is or successful is, and you choose not to forego that because it would go against your own moral compass. That's what I think the just man is. Whereas the unjust man is looking more externally to succeed in the outer environment in which he's living. Do you agree with that?
Maybe the unjust man sees the world as fundamentally unjust, and his actions are merely a means, a way to operate in an environment that is against the just man. I mean, that's what Socrates and Plato often said, was that the just man is worse off, but in the long run, he's better off.
Yeah.
Now, there was an idea, or when I was doing my writing, a man is not rich when he has many things others can see. Virtue lies in the place where other people cannot see, right? So our external assets, our physical assets, our tangible assets, be it wealth, be it our physical appearance, whatever it might be, is no reflection for arguably true wealth, which is tranquility and peacefulness of mind, serenity, to a certain degree. Now, what are the conditions for a serene mind? Arguably, things that go against our conscience and leave us feeling guilty can't be a benefit to our humanity or our soul, whatever it is that we're talking about. But I think there was a lot of things there that you tapped into that we need to unpack, and one of them I think was, well, loopholes within a legal system. Are they an artificial form of well, not even artificial, but I'm trying to think how I can describe this, but it's like, well, I know I'm committing an unjust act, but this loophole enables me to get away with it. And perhaps because this loophole is supported and upheld by society, and perhaps in its design does not come across as fundamentally unjust, that does not necessarily leave it out of the realm of possibility that it could be unjust. But I think that we can be deceived by justice in that, well, if this is a loophole, right, and it's fundamentally not illegal, then who cares, right? I've just been deceived by justice.
I like that question. Can I jump in quickly? Who cares?
Please.
Because as you were saying about feeling that internal level of guilt, I think at the end of that, what I said before in the Ring of Gyges in the parable, the question was asked to Socrates, who would not choose this way? And then he pointed to, well, the gods would always see his actions and he would be judged and, lead to atonement in the future, which was then followed up with, if he's that unjust, he'd also be able to trick the gods and give atonement to the gods, but we won't go down that route. So having that belief, I guess then it was the ancient Greek gods, and they would have that external level of witness of their actions at all times. If you take that away, then some people believe their ancestors that have passed sometimes are looking beyond them. If you don't believe that, then you're only down to yourself, that you're always the only person that is looking at your actions, in which that's when the guilt would arise. And I believe someone that's practicing unjust constantly, like again and again and again, that would numb to a certain degree. They would I guess live within that guilt so much that it would just become the norm, and they wouldn't judge themselves so much. That's how some people become so good at lying, deceiving, because they stop judging themselves. Would you agree with that?
I mean, going off that point, there's a lot to unpack, and it's hard to put my finger on what it really is. But you just said about you were kind of describing this overarching figure, be it gods or ancestors or whatever it may be, but they stand as a figure of justice, right? And to have that figure stand over you as kind of a conscience, an all-seeing, not necessarily all-seeing, but to some degree see what you can't see if you're so self-absorbed. If you're focused on that self-gain, you don't have on the back of your mind, what would my mother think of this, right? What would my mother think of me stabbing this person to death? What would God think of me? What would the gods think of me? So figures of justice, I think, can stand as huge huge influences on our conscious and our actions, because if we look in a family, right, be it the mother or the father, they stand arguably as figures of justice for children, right, as moral guides for righteous and wrong action. So taking that on board, then, if children had no mother or father, then they would be reliant on one's own conscience. Now, depending on the self, right, depending on how that individual is able to manifest an understanding of right and wrong, if we can even formulate a framework that allows those ideas to exist in reality and not let them be just some subjective concept or notion, which in society today, the concept of good and evil, right and wrong, is really the product of society based on how society responds to action. And we form our own definitions. Are we forming these definitions using the domain of logic, right? Because this is a whole different paradigm. When we're starting to rely on responses to action in a way to formulate justice, because we no longer have that figure, that overarching ruling figure that can tell us what's right or wrong. Perhaps that's within us to some degree, in enlightened or not even enlightened individuals. Perhaps just we all have some kind of inner sense.
Yeah, I believe that. And I think the more you're in touch with it, the more you would have to kind of hold yourself to a level of responsibility. If I'm going to talk about a personal experience, my first ever job, firstly, when I was applying for the job, I was completely inexperienced, but I was very into that's when I was getting into spirituality and trying to follow my own moral compass and being a good person. So I was very much all about that at the time, but I had no kind of work experience, fresh out of university. And when I first had applied for this job, I don't think they necessarily liked me in interviewing and things like that because I was very nervous. But they had a kind of questionnaire that they got loads of different people to do, because the job was sales based essentially, and they ended up choosing me because of how deathly honest I was on this questionnaire. And they really, the company wanted salespeople that sold with integrity, because it's very easy when you have things like your own commission and your job essentially is to be helping other people, but when there is that every time you do well you benefit yourself, some salespeople end up turning that selfish route where they will do anything to even not try to do the best for other people.
Cardinal sin of greed.
Yeah, exactly. Do it for themselves. And when I started working in this job, I was actually, when I first started, the best person in the whole company out of like 40 different branches or more was in the club I worked at. And she was just, a sales machine, crazy. But she was very skillful, but also to a level where she was unjust, and she would do anything to get the sale, and she would always get away with it as well. Like no one I'd ever seen. She never got in trouble and got away with murder. And as someone that was kind of learning, maybe that's just the way you're supposed to do well, because I just was starting off, I didn't really know how to do the job. So every time I realized I tried to do something or tried to lie or sneak, every time I get caught like that, because I suck at lying. It's just not something I'm not good at whatsoever. And it happened a number of times, but I would always get caught out. I'd get in trouble. And
I can imagine
that. Why does she get away with murder? But anytime I try, I'm just getting lambasted. But I think it's because I had that level of responsibility onto myself. And every time I had done it, I was very guilty. That's why people who have a high moral compass or don't lie very often, they're not very good liars. I wasn't a good liar whatsoever. And I had to form a relationship with sales for myself in which I'm being integral and being just, and also being very good at sales at the same time. And I went on to become myself the top salesperson in the whole company and do very well by following that route of justice. So there is a way, I believe, to success and also being just in yourself. But there is I think it's a harder route. There's no shortcuts in that route. So you have to.
It's a noble and suffering and hard work and honest action, because honesty is a virtue, and honesty in this day and age can send a man to his grave, in my opinion. So
last little interesting fact, that this person I spoke to, that was the initial best person in the company at that time, they would make a really good amount of money, but they also she also had a gambling addiction. So although she was generating this large amount of money with a certain level of injustice and cheating and kind of going around the rules and things like that, although she was so good at it and she didn't hinder herself with a level of guilt, I remember like she would splash away her whole paycheck as soon as the day after she got paid in a casino or
The
so maybe that
money
level
loses
of
value to
exactly
some
loses its
degree.
value when or that level of guilt has turned into or manifested as some kind of
That's very
other
true.
hole where it's exiting because you don't feel you really deserve it.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that for sure. Let me throw a Chinese proverb your way, sir.
I love a Chinese
Uh,
proverb.
and it's an interesting one because it made me think: is this a compromise? um, um, lie about the price, but not the goods. So let me say that again: lie about the price, but not the goods. Now, I think this might just summarize Asia to some degree when it comes to bartering and that bartering culture that exists in a lot of those places where, they'll set a high price and
So it's kind of always be honest about the product, but you can
the
change the
price is
price.
negotiable, right? Because a man or a woman might buy a product and they might pay, £150 for a product they feel is valued at that. They feel like that's its worth. But really the product may be worth 20 quid. But they're gaining a sense of happiness, right? They're happy and the dealer is happy. So is there any injustice there?
Not necessarily. The difference between how much the seller is willing to accept versus how much they receive. So although they were willing to accept, say, 10 Chinese yuan for their money, they actually get it for 20 because of their selling skills and negotiation. But the consumer's also happy to pay that. So is there any injustice there?
Well, I mean, the way I look at it, if I'm going to be anal about it, the happiness is kind of rooted in some form of deceit, but it's happiness. So the idea then, there's that argument. Well, the philosopher's slipping from my mind, but this isn't the right example. But maybe as an example, it might work. Let's say you've got one person on the train track and 7 people on a train track, right? Which one would you save? That question. I don't think it's the right example, but obviously, in some sense, you would protect the greater number, right? In some sense. So you're saying
I have a better example. I see where you were trying to go.
Yeah, it's far off. It's far off.
Would you go back and kill, say, a child, little baby Hitler, for example, and it would end up saving 3 million people, or 6 million people that died from the Holocaust, but you're killing a baby at the end of the day? That would you do that to do this greater good, but you're committing an unjust act? I guess that's what you're getting at.
I'm trying to think that. Yeah, I'm trying to think then how I was relating that to the seller selling a product that's gaining a profit. I guess it's more selfish in that sense, right? He's making the person happy, but he's deceiving them at the same time. Whereas I'm saving humanity but killing someone. I'm killing a baby, right? But saving humanity from Hitler. It's a stretch, but you see what I mean.
I mean, well, then that's the question: is all killing unjust, and is all making money unjust? I would say.
I don't think making money is an unjust thing at all.
I don't think so. Because if you're creating some kind of product and you have a massive company and the product's doing harm within society, then ultimately I think it's an unjust way to make money.
For sure.
Whereas if someone's creating a product which is greatly benefiting society, making people healthier or happier, and it's hyper successful, and then the money they're generating is being put back into the company to grow and then spent in other ways as well, again, I think that's completely fine. I don't think there's a tendency where people believe anyone that makes money is just evil. I don't believe that. And do I think all killing is evil? I mean, the ending of a life is quite, it's...
What does the Bible say about it?
The Bible says, just do not murder.
Thou shalt not murder, right? Thou shalt not kill.
Yeah, thou shalt not kill.
There's a difference there, right? Because one, apparently, the difference is that, well, it's a response to injustice in some sense, right?
Yeah, whereas in Taoism, it's a lot more flexible. It's more, these are the codes, but or the way. But if something is brought or perverted within the way, then you'd have to kind of put an opposing force to get things back to their natural order. So if someone is creating great evil, and say someone breaks into your home and is going to murder your family, I wouldn't think twice about murdering that person. Like, my inner warrior, my inner protector would come out, and I wouldn't feel that I had committed an evil act. And I think that's where a lot of laws, they have self-defense and things like that within them. But I mean, also going down that route, if you go to self-defense, you become like America, where everyone's insecure and holding a gun, and then there's a lot more murder.
We no longer trust the other side, right? We no longer trust our neighbors. We no longer love our neighbors, right? We view them with a certain degree of insecurity and hostility because of that fundamental existence of threat. It's a difficult one.
I know where Christianity's going with it. They're going that everyone is redeemable. So even someone that at that moment is evil. In the past, let me think of a figure. Malcolm X, for example. Malcolm X, he was a criminal. He was a pimp. He wasn't the best kind of person. They used to call him Red. He used to dress in red suits, and he was somewhat of a gangster. And he got arrested, and then he found Islam and the Nation of Islam, in which it transformed his life in his own way. He ended up becoming a massive good for the world. He used to give amazing speeches which uplifted the consciousness of the black population in America at the time, and helped the Civil Rights Act come in. So if someone that was completely like living an unjust life became a just person. So the Bible, I suppose, would say do not murder, because you may be hindering that process of the person who at that time is evil, but in the future they are always available for redemption, and may change and may do great good later. So if anything, love that person, try to help them, I guess do self-defense to an extent in which you're not murdering them. Would you say that's the kind of logic in Christianity?
No, it's just, I don't know the answer, but I think with the Malcolm X example, it's kind of like almost discovering. Well, we have to understand. I don't know the reason why he turned into Islam, but could it be that he came into contact with that dark side of himself? So he danced with the devil, so to speak, or exercised vice, and then through Islam he found virtue. Is that some sense, or was it through the vice he found virtue, like through doing wrong stuff? I don't know.
He was a member of the Nation of Islam, which wasn't necessarily the religion of Islam, because he separated from them later down the line, and I think the nation ended up. Well, there's a lot of theories that they're the ones that ended up killing him. Whereas Martin Luther King was he was a pastor and a Christian, and he was always turn the other cheek, be peaceful. Whereas Malcolm X was a lot more, if someone puts their hands on you, put your hands back on them. So he was a lot more fueling that retaliation, but also some argued sped up the civil rights process, because using injustice against injustice creates a fear in which they need to respond faster. Whereas Martin Luther King, also Gandhi, they taught that do not become your enemy. If they are being unjust to you, if you become like them or react in the same way they did, you're becoming like them. So it's funny that Malcolm X, who had such a drastic change of personality or effect on the world, and became quite a great person in his own right, but also would advocate for violence and things like that.
Well, the necessity of violence is real to some degree. When, I mean, in reality, in a realistic sense, there are times that any individual could be put into which require the necessity of violence for the protection of one's family member or themselves. And to put forward the question then, not to become like your enemy, well, if you do not, then you're a martyr. You're a martyr for your own value systems, right? You will die for what you believe in this moral sense, which, in some sense, is admirable, but causes the loss of life. Now, I know that there was that recent video of that guy that walked into a shop and he was about to shoot up the shop and he had a toy gun. I think this was in Texas. And I think he robbed the place and then he was leaving. And as he left, some guy pulled out a gun, shot him dead like after 8 or 9 shots or something, standing over his body. As a form of self-defense. What do we say? There was a threat. No one knew that it was a toy gun, right? Could have been a real gun. But the answer there is, I mean, not everyone has to die for their values, right? Not everyone is built that way to sacrifice their lives for their values or not become like those who are going to kill them, right? If someone's going to kill you, it becomes kill or be killed, right?
And that just creates that more level of untrust between each other, and that's why in America there's so much gun violence. Everyone does have a right to a gun.
Yeah.
The whole world blind, yeah. And I believe the only route to peace is through peace, if I'm honest. I think being just and holding your value system, you can practice self-defense in a just way as well, in which you're not ending a life, you're stopping someone's evil act. So I believe you can be just and have self-protection. I don't believe, I believe murdering ultimately is an act of unjust, with that question we had before. But can someone be totally just or totally unjust? I believe
Humans
good and evil
right?
exist within every human. Like the cartoons we used to see with the angel and the devil, like the good conscience and the bad conscience on everyone's shoulder. I really do believe every human does have that.
Yes.
And most people that are very unjust in society tend to be the ones that were hurt in the past or had injustice done upon them.
Swings in roundabouts, doesn't it? I think
so. That self-defense or that using the excuse of this person's unjust, so now I'm unjust. It's almost like they say hurt people, and it's like a rippling effect. The more people that are unjust just create more and more unjust people. Whereas you could also argue the opposite. That is loved people love people. So smiling at someone in the morning might change their whole day, or just staying within your moral code. No matter what someone does to you, you just absorb that and don't let it influence or change you as a person. But you create good rippling effects within society. I think that's the way to create more just people. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think to give my final points as we come to the close of this episode is really just to say that we are fundamentally human. Well, we are human, which means that we are flawed, right? We embody both characters, justice, injustice, and really the only guiding principle for me is to try my best to speak the truth, or at the very least not lie. So by saying not lying, am I trying to say that, well, in that field there I'm just, but all I'm saying is that I think everyone has the capacity for both sides, and it manifests itself in different ways, in different biologies. It's a hard question. I think that to be full of justice and to be completely like Jesus, or whoever, I think that is fundamentally unrealistic.
Okay. I would say that in the Republic book 2 we started discussing, they create 2 scenarios in which they created, where the just man is very poor and the unjust man is very successful. I personally do not believe that's the only way just and unjust manifests itself. I think if you do live an unjust life, you're always taking shortcuts, you're always cheating. It can get you ahead faster, but I believe there is also success through justice. Like, personally, I try to live a just life to the best of my ability, and I've had a level of success within my own career, and that's been by practicing justice. So I would say that the just man is better off, if I'm gonna argue, because they look on themselves with self-respect. So I think how I practice my life anyway is my action. I don't think always being unselfish is the only way to be a just person, for example. I think you can be both selfish and unselfish in your life, and sometimes selfishness is necessary, giving to yourself. I think it's unjust when you're doing harm onto yourself or doing harm onto others. You can do an injustice
to oneself, right? By not
exactly, doing an injustice to yourself or doing injustice to others. So I'd say if you're living within that, where you're doing good upon yourself but also good upon others, you're filling your well with whatever you need, and also letting your cup runneth over and helping others, and staying within what you believe your moral code to be right, then I think that you also can have a path to success and better mental health, better way people see you and respect you.
I fully agree with you that we should all try and live in alignment with justice, at least our best comprehension of it that we can afford. So that's all I have to say on the matter.
For all the viewers, thank you for watching. I hope you found it interesting. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Again, if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe, kind of join the Sage's Way with us, or join the Sageverse, become a sage yourself through this kind of practice, these discussions. And like the video, share with your friends, your family, anyone else you might think might be interested in what we're speaking about. And that's pretty much it. Peace out. Welcome to the Sageverse. Please just observe the birth of this creative surge, for the purpose to leave hatred purged and replaced with words that will make you learn to take your place on earth. And once you've taken your place and found your greatest of traits, cultivated the day, this will be making you say, this is the Sage's Way.